where you all are. On behalf of the store, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here tonight to celebrate Randall Munroe's What If 2. He'll be joined in conversation by depths of Wikipedia's annual weirdo. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of those who have made tonight's event possible. So thank you to our friends at Riverhead. Thank you to Nick and Alex, our house tech, and everyone, Larry and U of M's Center for Campus Involvement, Kelly, our other front of house manager, and all the Power Center staff here for making tonight's event possible. And thank you to my fellow booksellers who make these events run so smoothly, who make our bookstore thrive, and who, without whom I would not be able to do any events at all. So some important notes really quick, and then I'll get out of your way. First, thank you for submitting your questions for the Q&A ahead of time. We've chosen some, and Annie will read off select questions for Randall this evening. Your copies of What If 2 are pre-signed, but you're welcome to have your copies of What If 2 personalized, aka inscribed, this evening after the event. So if you'd like to have your copies of What If 2 inscribed or personalized, please stay in your seat following the program. My colleague booksellers will release you by row. We'll probably go out this way to join a line in the lobby. Another bookseller will help you post-it your book. So if you want to keep your book flat, that is flat to the full title page like that, that'll help us out. We'll put the name on a post-it for you. And then we'll have your book personalized. And then, just due to time constraints, there will be no drawing requests or posed photos, but candid photos from the signing line are, of course, welcome. And that's it from me. And all I'll add here is a big thank you to all of you for coming here tonight, for supporting your downtown local independent bookstore by being here. You can find more about our events at literarybookstore.com/event. And check our virtual events, if you'd like to peruse those, at youtube.com/literarybookstore. Without further ado, Randall Munroe is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, What If, and Thing Explainer, the science question and answer blog, What If, and the popular webcomic, XKCD. A former NASA roboticist, he left the agency in 2006 to draw comics on the internet full-time. He lives in Massachusetts. And Annie Rowerda is a writer, Wikipedian, and digital archives enthusiast. She maintains social media accounts called Depths of Wikipedia, which have been featured in the New York Times and the New Yorker. Annie hosts Wikipedia editing workshops and Wikipedia-themed comedy shows across the country, and was named Media Wikipedian of the Year by the Wikimedia Foundation. She holds a degree in neuroscience from the University of Michigan and writes about internet rabbit holes for publications like Slate, Vice, Boing Boing, and Input. She loves biking, her cat Pearl, and XKCD. Please join me in welcoming to Power Center, Randall Munroe, and Annie Rowerda.
Randall, it would be such an honor to be on stage with you any day, but particularly today because in 15 minutes, NASA is going to be crashing a spaceship into an asteroid.
Yeah, it's really exciting. To be clear, this is practice. This is the plan to deflect an asteroid if it ever threatens Earth, to do the Armageddon thing. NASA was like, hey, maybe we should try this to see if it'll work before we actually have an asteroid coming that is threatening us. So in about 10-15 minutes, the asteroid, the spaceship, which is live streaming on YouTube, will either hit the asteroid or maybe miss. I don't know. Normally, I mean, basically what I'm saying is like, why are you here at this event? There's a cool live stream of space thing.
Backstage, we did watch the asteroid. It was a speck on the screen. Anyway, though, we're here to talk about your book and your work, and I've been a fan for so long, ever since the early days of XKCD. Tell me about the first What If book, and tell me about the transition from writing webcomics to writing a full book.
So I didn't plan on doing What If. So I started doing comics that are about, science and math topics. And a really unexpected consequence of this is that people started coming to me, not even to answer questions, but to settle arguments they were having with their friends. They'd be like, me and my friend have been arguing about this question about Superman deflecting things that are moving at the speed of light or whatever. And they would always have some line that was like, we didn't think this was a good enough question to bother a real scientist with. But then we talked about it, we're like, we both agreed you seemed like a good person to answer it. But I don't know, I felt like maybe I should be insulted, but also as soon as they asked the question, I'm like, yes, I do want to answer this. Because I feel like getting those questions, it's like getting a song stuck in your head where you're like, I think I can figure this out. And then before I know it, 6 hours have gone by as I've been Googling, going down rabbit holes on, old scientific paper archives, Wikipedia, etc., until I finally got an answer, and I would be like, okay, I've done all this research, I've done all these calculations, I've learned to use software I didn't know how to use before, just to because it had a tool that would let you simulate this kind of thing, and I've got my answer, and I would write up this huge email and send it back with here's all the data, here's the citations, here's the answer. Hopefully this settles your argument. And then at some point, and half the time I would be like, I couldn't tell if the email had just gotten spam filtered or bounced. And so at some point I was like, wait, if I'm gonna compulsively put this much work into answering these questions, I should save these and maybe post them somewhere for more than one person to read them. And then, hey, why don't I solicit questions? And then I did not expect how big a flood that would immediately set off. And then suddenly I had more questions than anyone could possibly answer. And the what if too.
I think that some of the questions people ask are absolutely genius, and some of them seem like they're the type of thing that two people were sitting at a dining table arguing about for ages. The one about, can you fit all the world's bananas in the world's churches? That one seems like an argument. The other one was, how many leaf blowers could you attach to the back of a car to make it move? Which I was shocked to discover. It's only 12?
Yeah, it's not that many. And actually one thing I learned while I was doing that was, I was figuring out, when you have a leaf blower, you can look up their specs and how much air they move, how fast the exit velocity is. And it's actually pretty straightforward to apply rocket equations to this, to figure out what's the thrust to weight ratio of a leaf blower. And it's high enough that I haven't been able to find anyone on YouTube who did this, weirdly. But according to my calculations, I did not mention this in the book, this is extra content. According to my calculations, if you take a leaf blower and you just set it down on the ice, and it's one of the models that has a lot of thrust and doesn't weigh that much, and then you just turn it on, it should just start scooting across the ice. And so if you do this on a big pond that's just frozen, in theory you can just set a leaf blower down and set it free, and it will zip off into the sunset. And if you don't have ice, you could do the same thing with a skateboard. Just a leaf blower on a skateboard, instant self-propelled robot that you can send out exploring the world. And that was all stuff that I would just, the question about attaching leaf blowers to a car is kind of, it's really impractical. Even if you attach enough to get it to move, it won't accelerate very fast, so you'll be stuck at the red light, with someone behind you honking, and you're like, I'm trying, but I only have 24 leaf blowers, and I need 72 to accelerate faster. But then I was like, wait a minute, leaf blowers are weird, and then I just start thinking about more stuff you could do with them if they do have this much thrust. So I don't know, that to me that's the fun part, is even when the answer to the question is simple, it then takes you down all these other rabbit holes.
A lot of other questions were submitted by children. I liked the 5-year-old who needed to know what would happen if you built a billion-story building. And there was a 6th grade class that asked, what if you made a lava lamp out of real lava? kids are asking what if all the time.
Yeah, and I found, so that was something that I didn't, another thing I didn't expect, like, when I did the first what if, I was sort of thinking, these are things I'm curious about. I'm gonna try to work out the answers. And it makes sense in retrospect that like those answers would appeal to kids. But what I also found was, after I published the first what if, parents who get questions from their kids, they would like try to answer them, and the kid would ask like a follow-up, like why this? And then, well, what about this? And then kids will just keep asking questions. When the parents hit a point where they can't answer anymore, instead of changing the subject, some of them would just be like, okay, well at this point I will email the question to what if? And so that's some of my favorite questions in here are the result of that process. And I think what I like is when I solicit questions from adults who are like really interested in science and interested in the kinds of cool science concepts that we get to explore when we're trying to answer questions like this, adults will try to make their questions interesting, you know? And so they'll like add in science-y elements, or like try to act like, I think that when you're a grown-up, you feel like you're supposed to know stuff. And so people don't like admitting they don't know how basic things work, or they don't know, like asking a question where the answer might be really obvious. And so adults will try to ask sophisticated, complex questions that involve like black holes and things moving at, you know, relativistic speeds and like super cold temperatures, but then like superfluid helium. You'll get all these concepts in there. But little kids ask really straightforward questions, like the two you mentioned, or one of my favorites from a 5-year-old named Amelia. What would happen if you filled the solar system with soup? out to Jupiter.
It would be a disaster, I learned in this book.
Yeah, well that's what I love, is because adults are always asking questions that are like, what if you shot a nuclear bomb into a volcano at 90% of the speed of light, and there was a black hole or whatever? Like they're trying to make people will try to make destructive questions, but then the little kids will ask a question like the soup question, which is both a better question and also way more destructive than anything the adults have come up with. Because like that amount of soup in one place, just immediately it has so much gravity that light can't escape. It is a black hole at the start of the scenario, and it only gets worse from there.
Well, and you analyze the different types of soup. Like it would be different if you used broccoli cheddar versus like chicken noodle.
Yeah, the calorie count, it could be like 10 to the 41 calories or 10 to the 40 calories, depending on exactly what kind of soup. Although, like, I mean, you've got the planets floating around in it, so I don't know if those are a garnish or if those are like, if it's planet soup once you've, croutons.
Something I've always admired about your work is that you'll throw in references that I don't understand. And it's so fun to find them out. If anyone understands every single XKCD comic, like you should, I don't know, get a prize, because there's always something to learn. I'm thinking of a comic that is like, it says like, pseudo make me a sandwich. You have to know Unix to understand that joke. Or like, you'll reference things in the International Phonetic Alphabet, or obscure hoaxes, or the time that on Wikipedia, there was a 40,000 word argument about whether to capitalize the I in Star Trek Into Darkness. You send me down these crazy rabbit holes. And I guess what I'm curious about is, do you assume your readers have background knowledge?
No, well, so something that's funny is that people will assume that anything I write about, I know all about. And this is especially like striking when I meet like scientists who work on the thing that I made a comic about, which is always very intimidating. And they're like, you know, and they'll be mentioning, oh, and of course you're familiar with the so-and-so effect, you know, I don't need to explain that to you. And I'm like, I just learned about your thing like 2 days ago. I don't actually know about all this. But I find that it is easiest in a weird way, both, like, so explaining stuff and giving answers to science questions, you sort of have to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't understand the answer and be like, okay, how do I walk, what's the what's the stuff that I learned that like supports why this is the correct answer? What are the things you need to know to figure it out? How do you know that it's not this other thing? But it's also kind of true of doing comics that like it's easiest to do comics about stuff. It's like easiest to make jokes about stuff when you're still learning about it, because that's when it's the things that are confusing about it are the most obvious to you. And then like later on, you just like take them for granted. You're like, oh yeah, that's how this works, and don't think twice about it. And you don't realize it's like how you don't know how your house smells because you're there all the time, and it's only when you leave and then come back after a few weeks that you're like, oh, it smells like this thing and this thing. Oh, I should probably clean. But it's like one example is I did a comic. So someone was explaining to me a long time ago about how about this security problem that is either SQL injection or SQL injection, depending on which denomination of computer science you're brought up in. And it's a thing where you stick code inside a string of text, and then that string of text gets processed by software that is not written securely, and it like hits the part of the text that contains code, and it's like, oh, that's the end of the text. Now we're back into code, and starts executing the code. And when I was first understanding what this was, I was like, well, wait a minute. But what if you have that string of text inside, what if you have this string of code inside a legit piece of text? Like, what if you have a kid and you actually named the kid with one of these injection pieces of code? Like, then what do you do about that? I mean, that must be a thing that I must be understanding this wrong, And then I realized, like, no, that is actually, if you put that in a kid's name, you could then crash some databases every time the kid tried to enroll in school. And so I did a comic about that, and I had to write the injection, like the piece of code to go in the kid's name, and that was literally the first SQL code I ever wrote, because I had to learn enough to write the injection correctly. And then I learned to do it, actual, database code, and wrote all kinds of projects, and but that was the start. And so I did this comic about a kid being, his mom named him with the injection, and then I kept running into database people who were like, oh yeah, your comic is a great tool for explaining that to people, and we all appreciate your helping everyone understand about data, this database thing. And I always felt like funny about that because I didn't know about that until days before I drew the comic, Yeah, and so I feel like no one should know all of the stuff I do comics about, because a lot of it is just following me through, wandering through a bunch of different topics and hitting on, and every time I find something weird, doing a comic about it. And so it's sort of like if someone when you post all your Wikipedia screenshots, if someone's like, oh yeah, I've seen all of those weird Wikipedia articles, you'd be like, whoa, wait a minute, there's something wrong with you.
The only time I felt that way was when I met the guy in Virginia who has edited 1/3 of all Wikipedia articles. He has 3 million edits. And it was hard for me to name an article that he hadn't seen at some point.
Whoa.
Superhero status. I think it's clear to me that you want people to not be embarrassed about not knowing things. There's the XKCD that I think about all the time, where it shows somebody who's like, oh, what happens when you put Mentos in Coke? I don't know, that'd be weird. And instead of making fun of them, the other person goes like, yo, it's your lucky day, you get to find out. And that's what I feel like Randall is doing to me whenever I'm reading his book or comics. Are you passionate about making people feel not embarrassed about not knowing things?
Yeah, I think especially, spending any amount of time in academia really impresses on you this thing, but life in general too, that admitting that you don't know stuff makes you feel like you don't belong. In like when you get up into studying a subject and you're in a class with a whole bunch of people who seem to understand it, and you have something you don't understand, there's always a oh no, if I say I don't understand this, I'll be revealing to everyone else that I don't belong here. It also makes you be more kind of watching other people to be like, can I see any sign that they don't understand things that will give me a chance to show that I belong here and they don't, out of a sort of like defensive, like insecurity thing. And I feel like, especially like as you get further into academia and into graduate school, there's like this vicious cycle of everyone wanting to make sure that they don't look like they don't understand anything at any time. And what I really like about doing What If is like I have a physics degree, and an example I use is if someone asks, brings up like, what's the mass of an electron? I have a moment of panic, like, this is a thing I'm supposed to know. It's 10 to the minus 30 something kilograms. But if someone's like, okay, what's the mass of all the electrons in a dolphin? That's something that nobody is supposed to know off the top of their heads. Like, everyone is going into that like, I gotta look up some things. And I really like it. It's like half a pound. If anyone asks. I did look it up. And so I really like these ridiculous questions because, so my favorite thing about questions is it's not even whether the question is ridiculous or not, it's whether it has an answer or not. And I really, that's what I try to answer questions that have an answer, even if it's like pointless or ridiculous or not useful for anything. Because then you're like, well, we have to figure out what it is. No one knows it going into it. We want to find out what it is, and then you have to like figure out how to apply these tools of math and science and research to doing that. And I think that like showing that like these tools can take something you don't understand and turn them into something you now do know is really helpful in general, and also like the same techniques and the same math used to answer ridiculous questions can be used to answer really serious ones. Like counting the number of electrons in something is ridiculous, but like you do have to count the number of baryons in organic material, that's protons and neutrons, when you're doing radiation calculations to figure out like how they're going to interact with certain types of radiation. And so like that's a real calculation that you where you're like, well, okay, how much carbon is there? Let's add up every carbon atom. And it is also kind of a ridiculous calculation, but it's actually useful. Like, it's real science.
What are some things that you feel like you don't understand very well, even now?
Oh man. One thing that came up over and over in here is, so like, I feel like I should understand why lightning happens. Because we've known about that for a really long time. And so we understand, like why are there giant electrical sparks that come from the sky sometimes?
I think that you draw a puffy cloud and you put the plus signs on one side and the minus signs on the other.
Yeah, so that's what I learned. That's the textbook illustration. And so then the question of like, okay, why are there plus signs on one side of the cloud and minus signs on the other? If you look that up, you'll get like a science explanation, which is that there are updrafts in a thunderstorm. We know about that. It's like the air is rising and releasing heat for reasons that we understand. But then it carries little lightweight ice crystals up. And then there are these falling heavier pellets of kind of water and ice that fall through the updraft, falling downward. And those bounce off the ice crystals. And electrons are transferred, I think, from the ice crystals to the pellets as they fall when they make contact. And then so you get negative charges building over the bottom of the cloud, positive at the further up in the cloud. And then there's a charge difference between the cloud and the ground, and then eventually it builds up enough that lightning spark jumps. The question of why the electrons move from the ice crystals to the falling pellets, if you ask that, they'll be like, oh, it's like when you rub a balloon on your hair, and the electrons are transferred from the hair to the rubber of the balloon. And so the balloon becomes negatively charged, and your hair becomes positively charged and sticks up. Now, that, we don't know why that happens. Like, we don't know why electrons move from one surface to another when you rub them together. Like we understand that it does happen that way. If you look it up, it's like, oh, it's because rubber is, higher, is further on one side on the triboelectric series, and rubber is on the other side, which means the electrons will move that way. But the reason the series is laid out like that is because we tried rubbing a balloon on hair and the electrons went that way. We actually, so we really don't understand why the charges move in the direction they do and not the other way. There is a paper from this year reviewing this that's like, it is remarkable that this phenomenon of friction-induced static charging, which has been known since, documented at least since the time of the ancient Greeks and is obvious to small children, is still a complete mystery to science. We do not have a general theory of how it works. Only, people keep publishing papers about here's how it works in this one circumstance, but it's not applicable to other ones. It's like, we don't know why electrons do that. And then there are a bunch of other questions that people ask that turn out to come back to this. Someone once told me that if you crush sugar cubes in the dark, it emits flashes of light. And I was like, that sounds like a made-up fact. And I had one of those sugar things that had solidified in my pantry and a pair of pliers, and I was like, this is easy to test. I don't think this is true. And I took it into you have to take it into a dark room and let your eyes adjust for a while, because it's pretty dim, and then crush the sugar cubes, and it emits flashes of light. I was like, I can't believe this. And the reason is that when you break a sugar crystal, the two faces move past each other, and electrons jump from one to the other as they're pulled apart, also for reasons that we do not really understand. And I read, so someone asked a question about this. The effect is especially strong with the old type of window green lifesaver candies, which you could crush in your mouth and you could see the flash. It's because most of the emitted light is UV X-rays, it's outside the visible spectrum, but they contained a flavor, an additive that fluoresced. And so you get an especially bright flash with those. So this effect is not that well understood. Someone asked a question about crushing a whole bunch of those to make a lightning bolt. And I was like, oh, it's a different kind of flash. It's not like lightning. But then the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, it is like lightning in that it involves electrons jumping from one crystal surface to another when they are pulled past each other. And also, we don't understand either one of them. And then there's a whole bunch of that's not even the biggest thing we don't understand about lightning. There's so much. What I really like is how they're because I did a physics degree, we talk a lot about the mysteries of the Higgs boson, or how do we reconcile quantum mechanics and relativity, which is important for answering the soup question, or what happened at the Big Bang, and those are big, interesting questions. But I really like that there are all these unsolved problems in why does your hair stick up when you rub a balloon on it, and that they're not unsolvable. Up until about 10 years ago, we didn't understand why ice skates worked, why ice is slippery. There was a really common explanation about the blade of the skate pressing on the ice and causing it to melt because the pressure lowers, lowers the melting point of ice and creates a cushion of water that it slides on. And since the 1800s, people have pointed out that explanation suggests that you can't skate when it's below a couple of degrees below zero, which empirically you can, as anyone from Canada will tell you. And yet everyone was like, oh, that's weird, okay. And it turns out that's totally wrong. The explanation is something different. And there were a bunch of papers published in 2012, 2013 that figured it out. It's because there's the edge of the crystals become frayed, and the water molecules are free to move around, sort of like the frayed edge of a rug. And so it creates this water-like layer on the surface of ice that's slippery all the time, not just when there's an ice skate on it. And so that mystery was solved. And hopefully we can get the balloon thing next, because I really want to know about that.
I have seen so many applications of your ideas in real life from fans and readers. This is a small example, but you mentioned in a comic briefly the idea of Wikipedia titles that you could sing to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle song. For example, list of mines in Nova Scotia or San Francisco housing crisis. and somebody made a Twitter bot. Sadly, it is no longer active. But I want to hear what other things readers have created based on your ideas.
Oh man, so it's always the stuff that I don't expect. Like now and then I'm like, it would be really cool if someone made this, and then and I'll like mention it in a comic and no one bites. But then I'll have something where I'm like, oh, this is cool, but it's totally impractical. And I'll mention a comic, and that'll be the one that someone figures out a way to do. This one, it wasn't a comic actually, but in a what if answer from What If 1. Someone asked the question about what if you dropped a steak from outer space? Is there a height where you could drop it from where it would be perfectly cooked by re-entry heating, but still edible? Like when it landed on your plate. And this is a fun question because and so parts of this I knew how to answer. Like I could figure out, I worked out how to calculate from a given drop height, how quickly will the steak accelerate? It's moving, gravity is speeding it up, but then the atmosphere is slowing it down and the atmosphere is getting thicker as it comes down, and so you can figure out what's the peak speed that it will reach, how much time will it spend at that speed, how much heat will be applied to the front of it from hitting air at that speed. That's a stagnation temperature that's not too hard to calculate. And then I had to figure out, actually the part that took me the longest was then I was like, okay, I've done all the aerodynamics calculations to figure out how much heat is going to be applied to this, but that only tells me what the heat is going to be at the surface of the steak. And I need to figure out how quickly it would propagate through the steak. And that's like really annoying, because it's like three-dimensional heat transfer through a bulk substance that's not like super well defined in engineering textbooks. And so I was like, okay, food science has steak materials data, let's try to look that up there. Like in like industrial food processing, like can I get the thermal coefficients of conductivity of like different kinds of raw meat? And then it wasn't until I had spent like 30 minutes being really frustrated by trying to set up the equations for heat flow that I realized that there is an entirely different branch of scholarship that has really great data on what happens to a steak when you apply heat to one side of it, which is cooking. And I was like, oh, I could just get a cookbook and look this up. Be like, oh yes, this steak, this thickness will not be cooked by this, I really like, there was another question someone asked about like, I love when I'll spend forever looking at academic research on a subject before realizing there is a better resource. There was one, I was trying to figure out, someone was like, if they gathered all of the pollen that fell in their yard at once or something and gathered it together and lit it on fire, how dramatic would the flame be? Like, would it explode? Is it flammable? And I spent a bunch of time in like botany journals reading about like properties of pollen, and there was some stuff on like mechanical properties of layers of pollen, but nothing that's like, okay, but like for normal tree pollen, how is it flammable? But then I realized that teenagers and YouTube both exist and have combined to solve this for me. Because I just Googled light pollen on fire, searched YouTube, and there are like dozens of bored teenagers who have like lighters in driveways. They're like, hey, check out all this pollen. Let's see what happens when I click, whoosh, whoa, cool. I was like, oh, okay, yes, it's very flammable. Yeah, so I really like finding those resources. But when I did the steak calculation, so I had all the pieces here except the way a steak will fall. So to cook the steak, you have to get it going up to like Mach 3 before you get appreciable amounts of heat. So you have to drop it pretty high. It'll get up to Mach 3 on its own. Gravity takes care of that. But the way a thing will fall is tricky to calculate. And there are some really good papers on debris calculation for like re-entering rocket stages and satellite debris when they come into the atmosphere. They'll break apart, and they've done a bunch of modeling to try to figure out like how will the debris spread out, where will it fall, how does it flutter as it's falling, will it fall edge on, etc. And so these, so I was like trying to apply these calculations to a steak, but like most of them, again, they cover like solar panels or bits of fabric or like engine parts, but they didn't have like food. What happens when our satellite full of apples re-enters? And an object that's like flexible, like a raw steak, is going to be complicated to model. I was like, I basically gave up. I was like, I don't know how it'll fall. It'll probably fall face on, because things tend to do that, but I don't know how it will flutter, and maybe it will like tumble and tear itself apart. And so I just had a note that was like, the answer to this might be different depending on the hypersonic aerodynamics of raw steak. I couldn't find any data on this. It's too complicated to model. If you run a hypersonic wind tunnel and want to get some numbers on this for me, totally drop me a line. But that was like a footnote joke. And then a couple of years later, I got an email from these students at the University of Manchester, these PhD students, who were like, hey, we were doing hypersonic leading edge temperature modeling for our PhD, and we finished all of our experiments with like 4 hours left on the wind tunnel. And so we decided to run to the grocery store and gather some data for you. And so what they did was they took the raw steak and they mounted it in the middle of the wind tunnel and exposed it to hypersonic winds and got to validate at least. They couldn't have it freely tumble, but what they did get to validate was all of the temperature calculations and how the surface of the steak would react. And I felt both like, on one hand, I felt like it generally validated my calculations. Like you could see the shock wave and you could see where the temperature went up, and it went up sort of similar to what I expected, and it did char the surface of the steak and then ablate away the charred material. And the heat didn't propagate through to the middle of the steak, so the middle was still like cold. But the surface was cooked. It's called Pittsburgh rare, which is from like the idea that you cook a steak by just like slapping it on a hot metal when you're working a steel mill in Pittsburgh. And so like the surface is charred and the inside is raw. And so I was right quantitatively about what would happen. I did not appreciate how unappetizing the steak would look after this process was finished. It looked, they sent some pictures. I decided not to, they're not appetizing. It looks crappy. And they said that they had to spend, after it was over, they had to clean the inside of the wind tunnel. Just had bits of raw meat, just like specks of it all over the whole inside of the tunnel. And they did go on to get their PhDs. They were not kicked out of the school, so I'm happy about that. So not a great way to cook a steak, but cool use of a wind tunnel.
So you were right.
Generally, yeah. The steak tore apart more than I expected. Like the individual fibers or like bits of the steak were just getting sort of ripped away. I was sort of thinking it would be more like the whole thing flapping in the breeze. But yeah, no, it was generally, I felt good about the prediction.
As I was reading What If 2, I kept thinking to myself, how does he know this? Like, one question that I particularly wondered was, somebody asked, I want to lose 20 pounds. What if I just made the Earth smaller so that there wouldn't be as much gravity, and that way I would weigh 20 pounds less? And your answer, like, first of all, it would basically destroy life and he wouldn't even lose weight. But how did you know this? How did you begin to research this? And are you right? Do you think you're right?
That's fun. I've never gotten that question on the book. You're like, are you right about this though? Yeah, so that one's a fun question. So because like, a lot of people ask questions about going down to the center of the Earth. That's like a really popular topic, which you can't do because it's really hot. But if you went to the center of the Earth, there'd be no gravity. You would just float around there, getting slowly burned to death or crushed, you know. And maybe the single most common question submitted to the What If email address is, what would happen if you drilled a hole through the Earth and jumped into one side? Would you fall all the way through? And this is a great question. I love this question. It has been answered by so many different people that I'm like, I'll just let people Google. I'm not gonna like repeat work that like a bunch of other science people have done. But what's interesting is, so like at the surface you have gravity, and then at the center you have zero gravity. And if you drift away from the center, there's also not that much gravity. This is because of it's Newton's shell theorem, which says that like if you're inside a shell of material, you don't experience any gravity from it. So like if you go inside a hollow, sphere, then you can just drift around weightlessly. Like when you go near the edge, you don't get attracted to it, you don't get attracted to the center, you just float around. And what this means is that if you go inside the Earth, all of the material around you exerts no gravitational pull on you. You just have to worry about the stuff that is inward from you. And I had been reading about, so I was thinking like, okay, do you lose weight as you go underground in a tunnel? And the answer would be yes, except the core of the Earth is really, really dense. And so for the first half of your trip down toward the core, you actually gain weight. And so, because I was trying to figure out like what would the curve look like as you get closer to the center of the Earth, your weight has to drop. And so I had to figure out what's the density profile of the Earth and do this calculation to figure out how your weight would decrease exactly. And then in the course of answering that, I figured out, wait, if you remove mass from the Earth and go get closer to the center, you actually get heavier. And I was like, okay, I've done the math wrong here. And then I redid it and was like, no, that is actually what would happen. And then I looked it up and it's like, oh yeah, people have discussed this. If you go down toward the center of the Earth, you get heavier for a while. And then you start getting lighter as you get closer to the center. And so I definitely, when I get a weird thing like that, I'm like, okay, this can't be right. And I'll try to calculate it another way and try to do it another way, or look it up and be like, well, this can't be right because someone would have commented on this, and I find a scientist being like, yeah, fun fact, this thing. And I'd be like, this is true, weird. And so it's like, I'm trying to check myself to be like, can this be true? I want to figure it out. And I also know that if I mention something casually in here, people are going to come, I'm going to mention something about how a steak, deals with hypersonic wind. If I had just asserted that this is how the steak works, this is how this would probably go, and I wasn't sure about it, then the two University of Manchester students would be like, no, we've put a steak in our wind tunnel and this is wrong. It's like anything I read about, the people who have the access to the equipment to test it, very well might test it, and so I have to really check what I'm doing and try to be sure about what I'm writing about. But yeah, it's mostly I just try to think what have I learned that could apply to this? So with the falling steak, I learned about stagnation temperatures because that's the leading edge of airplanes. They had to make the front of the wings of the Concorde heat resistant because it flew fast enough that it had heat build up in a way that regular airliners don't. And it would actually get hot enough that you do heat tiles along the front of the wing. And you can calculate from airspeed and air density what that temperature is going to be. And so when I got the steak question, I'm like, oh hey, this is the same calculation from the Concorde thing that's from real space science. I can apply that here. So part of it is being excited. When I see a question, I'm like, I've learned a thing in the past that will help me answer this, and then trying to apply it. And then sometimes it's just I don't know how to answer this, but it's such a good question that I really want to know the answer, and then I have to go and learn a whole bunch of new science.
The physicist Richard Feynman often talked about the pleasure of finding things out. And I feel like I get to experience that through you when I'm reading the book, because I'm reading your process. I'm reading you think through things and discuss the different ideas. And it's fun to both learn about them, but also watch you learn about them as you're writing.
Yeah, it's a lot of what I'm doing a lot of the things that I try to answer questions in here, my ideas for how to answer them, turn out not to work out or not to be interesting or whatever. And I feel like my task at the end, when I'm summarizing my answer, is to go look at all of the different rabbit holes I went down, and then take the ones that either had something really interesting or funny there, or contributed to the solution, and assemble those together, and leave out the ones that took 8 hours and I didn't get an answer, or the answer turned out not to be that interesting.
I have some questions that have been submitted by people here.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
If you don't mind, about your copy of my book.
Yeah.
And So when we were backstage, and I was like borrowing your copy to look up something in the index, I noticed you had written notes. I didn't mean to read through your notes, but in the very front, when I opened the front cover of the book, you just had a note in pencil that said, "Who was Pope when D.B. Cooper jumped from a plane?" And I have to know. What?
It was John the 6th.
Okay, wait, no. Sorry. Let me clarify what my question was. Yeah, why was that in my book?
I don't recall exactly what in the book triggered this thought, but I vividly remember that the hover, when you hover over an XKCD comic, there's often a hidden joke. And there was one that said something to the effect of, the Wikipedia lists for lists of sexually active popes and lists of helicopter prison escapes are both surprisingly long. But as far as we know, there are no sexually active popes who have done a helicopter prison escape. I think about that constantly. I think about it all the time, because what if there is? That's a what if for you. What if D.B. Cooper was the Pope? That's your explanation. That's why I wrote that in the margin.
That's extremely good. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go backstage after the show and edit Wikipedia and create the article for list of sexually active popes who have participated in helicopter prison escapes. And then the text will just be like, this list is incomplete. Would you like to help expand it? And maybe the Pope will read it and help expand that list.
Well, hopefully we get some. Wouldn't that be exciting? I have some questions from the audience. And here's one that I'm very curious about. So before you created webcomics full-time, you worked at NASA. Is anything that you worked on as a NASA roboticist in space today?
No, thank goodness. So the robots I worked on were demonstration robots that were supposed to show off all the different, the building I was working in had all these people working on all these different sensors and computing platforms and different cool pieces of hardware. And our robot was the platform to demo these pieces of hardware to people to show how cool they were. And my job then was to make the robot navigate around and show off whatever it was that it was supposed to show off. But I just did the navigating part. So my job was just to make the robot not run into walls or the small children of visiting NASA higher-ups, and I was okay at it. We didn't hit any children. Definitely hit a lot of walls. The only expedition my robot went on was when I developed a mode where it would automatically explore a space, and because we were showing off cool drive systems, it had weirdly powerful wheels, and it had an omnidirectional system that could move it could just tack in any direction, and it was an R2D2 sized robot, but it was really powerful. And so I discovered that if I made a set of reins out of Ethernet cables, I could loop it over the top of the robot, and so our office had those rolling chairs with the wheels. And it turns out it was more than powerful enough to take off and tow me behind it. And so I got it to loop around the lab with me hanging onto the chair and banging into lab benches, and me controlling with the laptop balanced on my lap because I had my feet pulled up, holding onto the reins, and the laptop would be on the hand. And then it took off out into the hall. And it actually made a full circuit of the building completely autonomous, with me not doing anything. I once had to stop it. It tried to go into an office. It tried to go into some random rooms, but then and I would be no, back up. resume wandering or pick a new direction. But yeah, I made a full circuit of the building, and I had never been to the other side of the building, and so I got to like wave at a whole bunch of massive people as I went by who I had not met before. Like, oh, hi, I'm Randall. I work around the side of the... Yeah, and then and that was the main thing I worked. And then for some reason, they decided not to renew my contract. So nothing I worked on went to space, but it did make a full circuit of a fairly large building at NASA Langley Research Center, and I feel like that's almost as cool.
The next question, how do you get in contact with the experts you consult for your book's insight? Do you just Google nuclear expert, or are you introduced to them by a mutual friend? Or do you, and then it's cut off.
So I do occasionally just Google. So what I'll do is I'll look for papers that are on a topic that I'm interested in, and then sometimes I'll find like one paper that's like exactly what I'm trying to figure out, but like they don't have the data I want, or like they don't show how it would extend to, like, you know, there was one where it was like about someone had asked about throwing a piece of household furniture into the sun, and I was trying to figure out what, and I found all these papers on how comets disintegrate as they fall into the sun, which are loose masses of ice and rock, and I was trying to figure out like, how do you apply this to furniture? And I like went through and tried to apply the equations, but then I like had got in touch with the author eventually to be like, hey, how valid are these equations in this when you apply it to? For some reason, you didn't include how these would apply to really rigid objects, but yeah, and I generally find they're really excited to talk if they're the people who have done like if that's their area of study and it's like they are the main person in that area, then I have a question that it hits on that area. Like they're usually really happy to talk about it, and even if the question is ridiculous, sometimes I try to make it sound more scientific when I'm writing to them, just to try to make sure that, like, to try to get an email back. So it's like I'll be asking about the soup question, and I'll reach out to like a black hole expert, and I'll be like, hey, I saw you wrote this article on genes instability and gravitational collapse of gas clouds, and I'm writing about what about trying to apply this model to the collapse of a homogeneous density material that's, you know, near the density of water of approximately so and so, million miles across, and I don't say that it's soup until like the second email. But usually they're as excited as me about answering, which is fun. Like scientists like, you know, are curious about this stuff too, and that's something that I really like. Like getting confirmation of and getting to learn. My favorite example of reaching out to an expert was, this is also not in the book, but the cover of the book, like the cover of What If 1, has a T-Rex in Improbable Circumstances, which is not directly taken from a question, it's just like an illustration I did to try to get across the vibe of the book. And in this one, it's a T-Rex on top of an airliner that's taking off and it's trying to chew through the top of it. And so in my last book, I got to interview a bunch of experts about how to do things for how to, and one of them was Chris Hadfield, who's the former commander of the International Space Station and a test pilot who has flown over 100 different aircraft. And I had this plan of interviewing him to find out for a chapter on how to land. My plan was I was going to ask him questions like, okay, how do you land in this situation? I think I started with like, what if you have to make an emergency landing in farmers' fields and you see a bunch of fields? Which crop do you aim for? You know, and I was going to start with like the least ridiculous questions, and then work my way up the list as far as I could get before he hung up on me. And he graciously agreed to answer, agreed to take my call. And like when I asked the crop one, he immediately just starts rattling off. Like, well, you can't do this crop, you can't do this crop, this one's okay, this one's good. Corn is okay until the middle of June. I grew up flying, I would fly small planes in rural Canada. You run into this kind of thing all the time. As you're driving to the airport, you always look and be like, if I need to land there, can I? What about over there? Oh, have they brought in the hay in the fields? This one has cows, don't want to dodge them. And what I learned about test pilots and astronauts is that they are very difficult to fluster by throwing weird situations at them. Because he just answered all of my questions. Like, no hesitation, no delays, no like, that's a ridiculous question. And I like ran to the end of my list. He was like, okay, got any more questions? And so as a consequence of doing this for my last book, I had Chris Hadfield's phone number, and he had not yet blocked me. And so, when I was drawing this illustration, I did look up, I was like, can the roof of an aircraft support the weight of a T-Rex? And the answer is like surprisingly, like you can calculate this, and it's yes. Their airplanes are really strong. It's like, I actually find this really reassuring when I like fly on airplanes to know that in general, like they put them through these intensive tests where like they have to have the overhead bags are like attached to the airframe, and it has to handle like a pretty hard crash landing without the bags pulling the roof down. And so the roof is really everything's really reinforced, and you can apply that to figure out like the weight of a T-Rex, would it support it? And it's like it might be able to step through some of the gaps where through the aluminum, you know, the hull between the ribs, but if it stays on the reinforced parts, like the rafters in an attic, it would hold it up fine.
Thank God.
Yeah. And then, so I had done that calculation on my own, and then I'm drawing it, and then I realized, okay, so I take a picture of my drawing and text it to Chris Hadfield. No introduction or explanation of why. And just wrote, how do you think this plane would handle? And no delay, he just texts back, fine, as long as it doesn't wander too far forward or back, in which case you wouldn't be able to set the flaps to compensate. The center of gravity is too far off, you'll go into a stall or a dive. And so I wrote to him, so then I'm like, this is amazing, okay. And then I reply, so in this situation, if you're the pilot, what would you do? Instant reply, pitch forward, try to get negative G's. Meaning, fling it away. Like, pitch forward so you're being lifted up in your seat and the T-Rex is being lifted up. And then, if that doesn't work, go into a dive to build airspeed. And then you could try rolling back and forth, try to shake it off. And I hadn't immediately jumped to shake, you know, try to fling the T-Rex off of your airplane. And I was like, okay, well, so T-Rexes are extinct. If this is happening, this might be the only T-Rex alive. We don't, you know, maybe you don't know how it got on the roof of the plane. This could be an invaluable for paleontology and like biology and science in general. Like, if you could bring it down to the ground alive. And he just, again, no hesitation, texts back, not my concern. Yeah, pilots have a mantra that's aviate, it's like your priority list, aviate, navigate, communicate, in that order. It's you maintain control of the plane, second priority after that is you figure out where you're going, and then the third priority is you communicate with ground, with other pilots about what the situation. And so I replied to him like, all right, I guess like do paleontology doesn't really fit in between aviate, navigate, and communicate. It's somewhere below that. And he replied, honestly, communicate is a distant third. That's what you want in a pilot.
This next question, when you saw this beforehand, you immediately flagged it as one you wanted to answer. What is the least efficient way to cut an onion?
Okay, so I flagged this like minutes ago without looking anything up.
Okay.
So just, no. I mean, I'm just clarifying when I answer this. It's not that I have knowledge about this, it's that I'm curious. So someone else once asked me a question that I have not yet answered. This might show up in What If at some point, but where they asked if I had a humidifier and a dehumidifier in the room. This is many people have suggested this. What would happen? Would they fight? And it's like, yeah, I mean, they would. One of them would be humidifying the air and the other dehumidifying. But they're like, well, wait a minute, so if I keep running them, what if I fill the humidifier with Sprite? And then run the humidifier and dehumidifier, can I transport Sprite through the air? Will I end up with a dehumidifier that's full of Sprite and an empty humidifier? And the answer to that is no. But in order to answer this, I had to figure out, okay, if you let water evaporate from Sprite, what is left behind? Because the sugar doesn't really evaporate. And this is another place where teenagers on YouTube are the best resource. Because what I found, I couldn't find anyone doing this with a humidifier. But I did find someone boiling Sprite and boiling it away to make a kind of sauce. It's really gross. I mean, it's like a molasses. It's like very dark colored, which I guess like the sugar gets caramelized. But so when someone was thinking about like the worst way to cut up onion, like because there are all these best ways to cut up onion YouTube videos, but the worst way to cut up an onion, and I was thinking, okay, when you cut an onion, you cry, and it's because of something being aerosolized particles of something getting into the air and getting into your eyes. I'm not actually sure like which component of the onion it is, whether it's a specific chemical or if it's just like small flecks of onion that get released when the little cell walls burst. But that means that like when you cut an onion, there's bits of onion floating around in the kitchen. And so I was figuring just keep cutting and then have a dehumidifier running on the other side of the room. And then have it slowly collect the onion particles into something that you can then reconstitute into an onion on the other side. I think that's the worst way I can think of to cut an onion.
You're just sobbing, and you're like, no, I'm just cooking. Like, I'm just cutting an onion. We have time for about one more question. What's a recent or upcoming scientific project that you're particularly excited about?
So I normally encourage people to put their phones away and not, shout anything out during an event like this, just as general like crowd courtesy thing. But it's been like 45 minutes since the NASA thing was supposed to impact the asteroid. Did it work? Did it? Yes, okay. So I would say the upcoming thing I'm looking forward to is I want to go and see the stream, the video stream. Did you get to see the asteroid as it approached? And awesome. Okay, that is the thing I am looking forward to. And then like in like 45 minutes, I'm gonna have like a new thing I'm looking forward to. But right now, that's mine. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a ton of fun.
Going for Randall Munroe and Daniel Ray. Thank you for being here. If you don't need your book signed or personalized, you're free to go. If you want your book personalized, please stay seated. My colleagues David and Gwen are here to release you by row to join the signing line. We're gonna run the line up house left here into the lobby. We're gonna give some space for people who want to clear out first, room to clear out, and then we'll release you by row into the lobby. So if you're towards the back and you wanted to buy a book and then come back to your seat, feel free to do so. Again, if you want your book personalized, please stay seated and we'll release you by row. Thanks again for coming and have a great day.